And what was happening was basically that university and colleges were being told to take everything virtual and that their students could not go onto campus for their clinical experiences or their simulation education experiences. And this wasn't just impacting our colleges and our universities, but also our hospitals and our sim centers because of staffing, because of layoffs, and because of stay-at-home orders. And while all of that was for our protection, it created a big problem where people were not able to get the experience or the education that were required of their programs or their occupations. And not only was that preventing some people from graduating and being able to join the workplace, but also preventing some of our ongoing practitioners from furthering their education and maintaining some of their competencies. So what we're going to talk about today is a bit about the role of virtual simulation in replacing some of those lost experiences in clinical hours, touch a bit about how to supplement and complement those lost hours with virtual sim, and then the bulk of our conversation will be about how to really support that virtual simulation curriculum with materials and resources before and after the experience. But before we start, I want to divulge a little bit of a disclosure about the creators of the presentation today. I myself am Molly Schleicher. Also another creator was Rebecca Wheeler and Megan True, who you will be hearing from in just a few minutes. While we were all nurses and nurse educators, the content and the way in which this content can be used in curriculum is not exclusive to just to nursing. It can be used by medicine, it can be used interprofessionally, it can be used really by any curriculum that's using virtual simulation in order to meet the needs of an educational experience. When faced with the COVID-19 crisis, institutions were abruptly told to leave campus and take their well-oiled curriculum machine and make them all virtual. In programs as heavily weighted in experiential learning as healthcare, this did not just feel like a daunting task for some, but an impossibility. Luckily, we do live in a world where virtual reality and virtual simulation are not just prevalent, but flourishing. And shortly after this happened, the leaders of our simulation communities banded together and provided this research that supported using virtual sim in order to replace clinical hours. But all virtual simulation is not created equal. Virtual simulation can be considered high-fidelity simulation according to the SSH dictionary, but for this to really translate into meaningful learning, it needs to be backed by evidence-based practice, enhanced with the realism of a live clinical experience, immersive enough to invoke high levels of critical thinking, clinical judgment, and empathy, and supported with pre- and post-scenario structures that promote reflective learning and deliberate practice, all in a psychologically safe container where students can go and practice and learn from their mistakes. So as mentioned, virtual reality can be considered high-fidelity simulation as it has a high level of interactivity and realism for the learner. But I want to take just a moment to look at the word fidelity, which means faithful, devoted, trusty, sincere. And that's really what you get from a high-quality virtual reality or a high-quality virtual simulation platform. In addition to that, you get that from the well-intentioned and meaningfully structured curriculum that embraces that virtual simulation, which is what the wonderful Megan is going to speak to in a bit more detail here in just a moment. Before we get to that, I wanted to touch just briefly on the question that sort of prompted this whole discussion, which was how much virtual simulation can equal clinical time. As I was working with some of my institutions to help conceptualize this question of how much sim or clinical time can be substituted with a virtual simulation scenario, I started with one of our virtual reality scenarios, which was about 20 minutes in length. After the student completes this virtual reality scenario, they are then prompted with some self-reflection questions and provided with some personalized feedback based on the decisions that they made in the scenario. One of the best things about virtual sim is the repeatability. And so that student can then review that feedback, do their self-reflection, and jump right back into the scenario and do it again, building on the critical thinking that they have now gained during the first run through. Our best practice tells us that you should debrief about twice the length of the scenario, and so I would allow at least 40 minutes afterwards for a review of that secondary feedback, as well as a proper debrief, whether that be a self-debrief, a group debrief, synchronous or asynchronous. And of course, we want to support that learning and set our students up for the best chance of success. So we would provide them with some pre-briefing ahead of the scenario. Now, if you're doing the math, all of this equates to about 2 hours, and that is working with a single scenario. Depending on where you work and what your institution is and what your governing body says that you can do, some institutions allow a 1 hour simulation experience to equal 2 hours of clinical time. And so as this example outlines, you can take that one virtual reality scenario and equate 4 hours of clinical time. This is very important for our institutions, as what their immediate need was to replace clinical time. But what's even more important than just replacing the time is really making it meaningful and really supporting it with the materials that the student needs, as well as the faculty needs. And that's where I'm going to hand it over to the beautiful Megan True, who's going to speak a little bit more in depth about some of those supportive materials to engage our students' learning in virtual simulation.
When it comes to supporting virtual simulation, at OMS, we are all about ensuring that not only the learners have what they need to be successful and meet their learning objectives with our VR platform, but also that the faculty have what they need to make sure they're providing what the students need to be successful. And to do that, we have an amazing team of educational specialists that come from a variety of backgrounds, from clinicians to educators and simulation specialists themselves. And we as a team specialize in assisting the faculty, educators, and technicians in the simulation labs in not only the development of curriculum, but also lesson planning and helping to provide creative solutions and ways to implement our OMS VR and distance learning. And this will be for all levels of learners, from high school to post-secondary and to graduate, as well as professional development in the healthcare facilities. So one way our educational specialist team has come up with assisting faculty members in implementing our platform is the development of something called a faculty pack. And what it does is it has an all-in-one, one-stop shop kind of feel to it, where the faculty member can go in and have easy access to the development of a lesson plan or curriculum design focused around either a specific simulation or simulation in general. So they can create a kind of form where they fill in the blanks. It's already kind of preset for them to be able to utilize a scenario, provide pre-briefing materials where the student or learner might have to go in and read a chapter or complete an exercise or task, and then maybe do a self-reflection before they ever get into the simulation itself. And then after the simulation, they can review their feedback and do a self-reflection then, and then maybe another activity following, either with direct tie-in to the unit of study, or even an extension into something that maybe another topic of cultural diversity, legal and ethical, that may not have been included in the simulation itself, but can be discussed alongside of it. So in a parental situation, what else could have been done to help ease the anxieties and fears, so it can be a discussion starting point. When it comes to pre-briefing for the virtual simulation, at OMS we follow the INACSL standards of best practice for simulation design, and that is all about making the environment for learning as easy to use as possible. Specifically, Criterion 7 describes what pre-briefing should look like. So using those principles, it really focuses in on orienting the learners to the environment and equipment, what their role is, and their limitations within that role. It's about reviewing those learning objectives, so having the learners understand what their expectations are that they know how to get to those expectations and maybe have all of the knowledge necessary to get that completed. It involves pre-simulation activities, from maybe a reading assignment to an activity, or maybe even a self-assessment of what their thoughts are about the learning that's occurring. And then a timeline of what to expect within the simulation, how much time is allowed, what time is involved with the pre-learning, in the scenario learning, and then debriefing time frame. And it can also be beneficial to provide like a pre-recording of what the scenario might look like for them to have an understanding before they get in. When it comes to pre-briefing for the virtual simulation, our educational specialists have come up with some ways to help faculty by a worksheet that helps with planning, so they can go through how they want to implement the simulation, what they're looking to get out of it, as well as how to pre-brief and debrief the simulation. So when you're pre-briefing, it's always best practice, like we just discussed, that you provide the learning objectives to the learners, that you get them familiar with the environment so that it can be an experience where it's not awkward and they're not worried about the external stuff, but really they can focus in on what they're doing with the patient and be able to critically think and make clinical decisions that are impactful and timely. So by providing the pre-brief, it's allowing for the learner to know what's expected, how to use the platform to get to that, and provide information up front that they can use within the scenario. So for instance, you have a pre-simulation reading assignment or activity, a self-reflection possibly, and then you describe what the learning objectives are, maybe provide a video of what the simulation might look like, maybe a brief overview to get them comfortable and familiar with it before they actually get in and do the work required to meet those objectives. So just as in the pre-briefing, we follow the INACSL standards of best practice for debriefing. There's a lot of research out there that shows that debriefing is one of the best ways to learn from simulation. So providing that feedback session, we do it with the platform itself through the Pearls debriefing exercise after each scenario. We also provide feedback on what was done correctly to meet those learning objectives within the scenario specific learning objectives, as well as provide a score and analytics for the different criterion that we focus on. The debriefing exercise can be whatever the faculty member or whatever your curriculum dictates. So where we have something standardized, you can edit or adjust what you want it to show. You can have different types of discussions around what the scenario has in it. So where the scenario might be focused on a sepsis case, you can then take that case and enhance the learning in terms of legal and ethical issues, or death and dying, or the cultural sensitivity issues. We can adapt the scenario to meet specific units of the study that may not be evident within the scenario itself, but there's extensions of learning that can be done, and that's where the educational specialists come in. They can help the faculty member or the simulation technician create a learning experience that isn't specific to the scenario, but that you can take the scenario, get those learning objectives that are standardized out of it, but also then take it into communication or other types of learning. So this is an example of what a pre-briefing timeline might look like, included in something that would be sent out to students. So this is just one section of a pre-briefing material. It lists the scenario name, so you can edit that there. You can choose whether it's in a VR headset or if it's going to be screen-based online. You may even include whether it's with the faculty member or if it's on the learner's time, so whenever the learner wants to do it versus a specific time, or with a specific person. So if you want to pair students up, you can do that. It also lists the purpose, so that 2-to-1 ratio that's been research-based and proven is what we've got listed here, and that can be a 4-to-2 or a 2-to-1 ratio. So for every 2 hours, for every 1 hour of simulation, you'll receive 2 hours of clinical time. And it lists that you will have the learner do a pre-briefing document review. So they'll look through the pre-briefing materials. They will do that pre-briefing work. Then they will engage with the scenario, and that has a typical 20-minute time frame. Some of the mental health scenarios are a little bit longer, but in general, that's the 20-minute time frame. Then the next 20 minutes would be reviewing that feedback and learning from what they did right, what they did wrong, maybe doing a self-reflection of the experience and what was learned. Some students will go back in and do it again, so there's another potential 20 minutes there. And then the completion of the simulation worksheet. So with faculty, our educational specialists can work with them about creating those post-scenario worksheets. We've created a few for an example that's contained within our faculty pack. So the faculty will get not only the resources or the research that supports all of what we say, but in addition some some documents that they can edit or adjust to meet their needs. Then the students will attend either a synchronous or asynchronous debriefing session, so that's editable as well. It can be in a forum setting or a discussion board, or it can be in person through a Zoom meeting, or it can be a phone conversation. So it can be adjusted to meet the individual institutional needs, to meet those objectives that the faculty are looking for. But this is an example that we can help provide.
On behalf of Rebecca, Megan, and myself, we just want to thank you all for joining us today and riding along on this journey as we discuss virtual simulation as an education modality and the different ways that you can provide materials and resources before and after your scenarios in order to enhance your learners' experience. For more information or to continue this conversation offline, feel free to email any of us at ourname@oxfordmedicalsimulation.com. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference here.